The Smash games, platform fighters, and really most fighting games in general all have something in common. Story mode, arcade mode, whatever it's called, for the most part, sucks pee-pee poo-poo. I apologize for the harsh language. A lot of fighting game single player modes are basically just, hey, fight this computer, fight the same computer, but bigger, or fight this computer, but the numbers are different. Ooh, ha ha ha. And there's just a bunch of arbitrary systems at play to pad out gameplay and artificially increase difficulty. Now, obviously, there are a lot of reasons for this. Mainly, the developers are not trying to make a single player game. They're making a fighting game. And all the development time and resources are going into the multiplayer. Rightfully so, but that usually means the single player stuff is just an afterthought. I'm not trying to blame anybody for this, but it also doesn't mean we can't speculate on what would a good single player fighting game look like. Nope, not this, sorry. This isn't that. But in a lot of ways, Subspace Emissary does actually come really close. When you look at the broad strokes or concepts and ideas, Subspace Emissary does everything right. But it's in the actual execution of these ideas where things go horribly wrong. We're going to be looking at Subspace Emissary a lot in this video though, and we're going to examine what it did right, what it did wrong in comparison to what I think a good version of its ideas actually does look like. But Adam, this is a first-person shooter! Also, I didn't read the title, I guess. Bear with me. In this video, we're gonna take a look at the design of Doom Eternal and see how this humble little indie first-person shooter actually has design philosophies and techniques that I think could apply to fighting games. But Adam, that's a different first-person shooter! Quake. It's an old-school, fast-paced, technical first-person arena shooter. As the No-Clip documentary on the development of Doom 2016 points out, Quake was very influential in the design sensibilities of both Doom 2016 and then eventually Doom Eternal. And by the way, if you're at all interested in Doom's design, you should probably also check out that documentary and the other Doom-related videos on No-Clip. A big aspect to the modern Doom game's design was not simply making another corridor shooter. They wanted to do something different that hadn't really been seen in single-player shooters, especially at that time. But the irony is that they found a way to do that because of an early version of its multiplayer.
Ultimately, the layouts, the spaces, really is an evolution of that multiplayer idea, the dance, the move around the space. And so the balance was striking a believable place to a multiplayer layout.
So the team at id took a fast-paced, technical, multiplayer game type and translated it into a single-player experience. Sound familiar? I'm talking about fighting games. When looking at both Subspace Emissary and Doom structurally, they're actually really similar. Platforming and mild level gimmicks linking up the meat of the gameplay, arena fights. Although Subspace Emissary definitely loses focus a lot, and the gimmicks are often more random and frustrating instead of a test of the player's skills. And also, so many auto-scrollers, like, why are there so many Jesus fuck! But simply throwing you into a multiplayer-style arena isn't enough to make a game fun. A big challenge of translating a multiplayer game into a single-player one is the lack of other players. Obviously. Multiplayer games work because you're pitted against opponents as smart as you, because they're humans. They force you to play well and fast and technical because if you don't, they'll punish you. So how do you get a player to play like that when there isn't another person forcing them to?
You think about multiplayer, you're not backing up, right? Like you are going forward to the next location. You're going to I see the ledge, that looks like a place of advantage, I'm gonna go there. So that was always in the mind of every designer, just about everyone. It's like, well, push forward idea was, well, we don't want to be scared and backing into a corner. That's kind of the picture. Not necessarily that you would be, but stay away from that. So how do we make sure that, and like things like the glory kills, that played into it beautifully, getting loot or getting health and from the bodies, it's like, oh, well, that means go that way and get that stuff.
Push forward combat. It's not just a way to talk about the glory kill system in the modern Doom games. It's a philosophy that permeates throughout the entirety of Doom's design. So, systems were put in place to reward the player for moving around and being aggressive. Glory kills give you health, the chainsaw gives you ammo, the list of these types of systems go on and on. If we're designing a better fighting game single-player experience, then we need to reward the player for playing how we want them to play, which is hopefully aggressive and cool. Let's just talk about camping in fighting games for a second. Now, obviously, this is a whole can of worms in and of itself, but in a sense, we just implied that camping is not fun. And here's the thing, it's not. But there is a difference between camping in a fighting game versus a single-player game. Single-player games are about the relationship between the player and the game, while multiplayer games are about your relationship with another player. In a video game, you want to be engaged, you want to be active, making decisions that impact what happens next. In a multiplayer game, when you are camping, you are in a sense being active, because you're influencing your opponent and planning out your next move. But in a single-player game, if you're forced to wait because of the game, you're not being active. You're just waiting. So when we're talking about being aggressive and moving around, it's not really meant to be any kind of commentary about people's playstyle. It's about the player's relationship to the game and how active and engaged they are. Okay, back to it.
You kind of test the bumpers, you know what I mean? Like you kind of play through the game and you want to see like, okay, do I really have to play they want me to play? Because I don't really want it's this weird relationship.
Do players do that? Do you think?
Like, I do, because I'm lazy. I don't even do it as a dev. I'm just like, I don't want to, like, I'm weird. I'll buy a $60 game and then I don't want to do anything that they're telling me to do until they make me do it.
Reward systems like the glory kills help encourage players to move forward, but that in itself is not enough to make a single-player fighting game fun. Let's look at a common game type used in Smash's single-player content, the multi-man melee, and a similar situation also happens in Subspace Emissary. Waves and waves of just the same type of enemy. If we rewarded the player some bonus percent for going and knocking out opponents, it would help the player move around a little bit, but there's a larger issue at play here. Multi-man melee is shallow and too easy. The enemies often just make a beeline for the player and die almost instantly from any kinda strong attack. Not much is stopping the player from just standing there and doing the same thing over and over again. And that's why you get bored. In a good platform fighter, the player has a lot of options, both related to movement and attacks. But these options make it challenging to code an AI that can compete with a human player without it feeling cheap. Doom Eternal in its early development stages had a similar issue. The enemies of Doom 2016 just didn't pose a threat because of the player's new options.
Meat hook, dash, and every ability that we gave the player completely broke the game in that nothing could touch you. Like you could just meat hook around and dash, and the AI just looked slow because the race car got faster, but the track was still the same size. And so it made it just too easy. So we had to actually make the racetrack, or the chessboard and the chess pieces, more sophisticated, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more challenging to be able to keep up with the new race car that we had built.
The Doom devs refer to their demons as chess pieces because they all fill different roles and attack the player in different ways. This is one of the main reasons multi-man melee and a lot of the combat sections in Subspace Emissary are really boring. Either the enemies are all the same, or the differences in the enemies don't matter.
It was all a lie, basically. I was playing in a way that was like meant to make it look cool, and I was weapon switching and doing all these things, but the whole time I was, I'm like, the game needs to make you play this way. Like, I'm going to play this way because this is kind of like a touch point for what we hope to achieve, and how the game will naturally make you want to play, where I'm switching and I'm moving and I'm dodging, and you can feel it. You can feel the action, and it looks awesome. Because if it looks fun to play an action game, then it probably feels fun to play an action game. So, but the way I really needed to play was just walk up to everybody and point blank them with a double barrel shotgun.
The Doom developers from that point forward sought to rebalance the game and turned it into an experience where the player is forced to play in a fun way. Looking again at Subspace Emissary, even though there's a bunch of different enemies, the variety doesn't serve a purpose. The enemies are just kind of thrown at you randomly, and the answer to the problem of how to defeat them is always the same solution. Just hit them a bunch. This is the single greatest issue that most fighting game single player content has. Unlike with a human opponent, there's basically never a reason to use combos, or to use advanced movement techniques, or to play remotely similarly to how you would play against a person, which is when a fighting game is at its most fun. Now, I know at this point it might sound like I'm just saying someone should code an AI that is as complicated as a person, But that's not it. It's not about getting the player to play against something as complicated as a human. It's about getting a player to just do the things they would do against a human. In Quake, a cool player is constantly moving around, switching weapons, they're making decisions, and these actions are the key to engagement. And the Doom developers identified those actions and called it the fun zone. Everything they wanted the player to do in order to be engaged fell into that zone. And while most of the options in the fun zone were available to the player in Doom 2016, they realized that people wouldn't necessarily choose those options if a more boring system worked. So in Doom Eternal, every demon or chess piece was then designed or redesigned into forcing the player to do the fun things instead of the boring things.
We really went through and we tried to shore that up, to make it, to hold the player accountable, to not let them out of the fun zone. You know, the fun zone is managing resources, it's doing all these different things, it's thinking constantly, it's using the right tool for the job, it's diving into progression. You know, it's what you'll see, shooting weak points of enemies, you know, all these different things. And when they don't play that way, we kill them.
If you don't move around, you die. If you try to just use one weapon, you die. If they're not in the fun zone, Doom Eternal will discourage, punish, or even kill the player. It will kill you in real life. Doom's fun zone is not all that different from what I think would be fun in a fighting game, but there's almost no player accountability in Subspace Emissary or any similar fighting game mode. Being rewarded for playing well is good, but player accountability, having consequences for your actions, is the foundation for challenge. This is what makes the game hard but fair. The challenge comes from being able to match the skill level required by the game. Adding modifiers to fights doesn't really demand a higher level of technical skill. It usually just demands more time and adds a level of randomness, which is the bane of skill-based gameplay. So, what would be the fun zone for a technical platform fighter? I'm just gonna list some of the things that I find really fun, but let me know what you think should be in the fun zone in the comments. The first two things I think are pretty straightforward. Both of these are shared in Doom Eternal. If we look at the Doom Imp, we have one of the simplest ways Doom encourages the player to move. The Imp throws a fireball towards where you're standing. The Imp's fireball is easily dodged by moving, and you can see this in a lot of the basic projectiles in the demons. They're not really designed to hit you, they're designed to motivate you into moving. The Pinky, or any of the charging demons, they motivate the player into using the movement-based skills like the double jump or the dash. This is one of the biggest issues in Subspace Emissary, because mostly the enemies all just kind of crowd the player at the same time, and since the enemies come to you, there's never a reason to use advanced movement. Oh yeah, and Brawl never had any anyway. There's really only one enemy that I actually like in all of Subspace Emissary. It's this axe dude. He has a humongous attack and he takes hits like a champ, but he's actually exploitable in a really fun way. You just move behind him. My brain actually lights up with activity when I fight this thing, because otherwise I'm just sitting there spamming any attack I want, which I shouldn't be doing. I should be caring about what attacks I'm doing and who I'm fighting. When it comes to prioritizing targets, Doom uses things like the Arachnotron's turret. It can hit you when you're moving, and it does a lot of damage, but it's a weak point that can be eliminated with a specific weapon. Doom has a plethora of weapon-specific counters, encouraging the player to switch weapons constantly in order to be optimal with damage. The way I look at it, you can swap out the Doomslayer's weapons for all the different moves a player has in a plat fighter. I'm not saying that Doom's systems should be copied exactly, although that would probably still be great, but having something like the weak point system, but relating to a character's specific move, would motivate the player into using all aspects of the character's kit, instead of just repeating a few options that are the best. In Doom's fun zone, they call it weapon switching, but in a fighting game, I'll just call it the diverse use of a moveset. Having the freedom of options is pointless if there isn't a purpose for each of those options. Side note here, I understand that there's another development issue. The Doomslayer is one character, while in fighting games, you're dealing with a lot of vastly different characters. There could be some creative workarounds for this, but it'd definitely be difficult to accomplish all the things I'm pointing out without homogenizing the characters or limiting the scope of story mode. Subspace Emissary has a lot of these issues, potentially because it was designed for you to be able to go back and play any level with any character. While it is really inclusive, it makes it really bland, and I'll just say that a good game isn't good because it's easy or hard to develop. It's just good because it's good. Anyway, back to the fun zone. Combos and kill confirms. This is why many of us play fighting games. But combos present a big challenge when it comes to a single player experience. As you can see in Subspace Emissary, it's hard to do when there's a million enemies all trying to kill you. So step 1, don't f***ing do that. And step 2, you need a system to allow the player to do combos. In Doom, the glory kill gives the player straight up invincibility, otherwise you would just get murdered by the surrounding demons. But even when Subspace Emissary doesn't bombard the player with a bajillion enemies, like during the boss fights, there's still an issue getting in the way of combos. Bosses don't ever take hit stun, so it doesn't make your attacks feel like there's any impact. Doom, even without fighting game combos, has a falter and stagger system, so it feels like enemies and bosses are reacting to what you're doing. In Subspace Emissary, the bosses don't really care that you're there, they just do their predetermined pattern. And in a lot of ways, the player ends up doing their own mindless pattern, because the player usually has enough stocks to just throw themselves at the boss till their health bar is gone. Which leads to the next item on the fun zone, resource management. The way Subspace Emissary handles player health or percent isn't really resource management. You just get chipped over time till your percent becomes a problem. And if you're lucky and go out of your way, you might get a power-up that just resets the situation. Either way, you're basically just subject to the game's will on what percent you're at, and don't have much control over how much you have, besides just not getting hit. And the multiple stocks you do have just mean you have to care even less about percent. I can see why they did this, since there's not really a good way to lower your percent, and it adds to the theme of it being a big sprawling team up of characters, but a bad side effect of this is that you don't have to care about anything if you have enough stocks. In Doom, health isn't just a bank of mistakes you're allowed to make. It's a system designed to force player interactions. Remember push forward combat? Resources in Doom are not just designed to be spent and then reset when the level ends. Their goal is to create an equilibrium of tasks the player needs to accomplish. They know you're gonna get hit. They know you're gonna run low on ammo. It's not about playing so good you don't have to worry about your resources. It's about how those resources make the player play when you do have to worry about them. And then finally on this list, the neutral game. It's about making choices, adapting, or planning out an attack. This is probably the most difficult thing to translate from multiplayer to single player. But as you can see in Doom, it's not about making one enemy complicated enough to challenge the player. It's about using a group of systems and simple enemies with different roles, all working together in order to have the player make choices, adapt, and plan. This isn't really a singular item that you can just throw into the game. It's through all of the other items in the fun zone working together that ends up creating the same kind of thinking that we want to get out of the neutral game. It's not quite the same thing, and it never will be, but if the systems and enemies are working together in the right ways, it can scratch that same itch and be really fun.
It's like last time, see a guy, run up to him, double barrel shotgun to the chest. Where's the next guy? This time, see the mancubus, run up, boosh! Holy shit, that was half my health. Okay, so the grenade constantly falters him, which creates this opening. So I would throw the grenade down, slide up to him, and then use the double. And just like that alone, like
Right.
it kind of feels more like a dance. You know, like I can't just throw the right hand. I have to, set it up with a jab first.
The main takeaway that any future fighting game needs to grasp is that the fun zone is the goal. And what Doom shows us is that you can get your players into that zone by rewarding and forcing the player to be there. Every system, every facet of the game is designed to back up that premise. Now, I know it may sound harsh, but that's the point. There is no sense of accomplishment without challenge.
We don't want to make a hard game. Like anybody can make a hard game, just like, hit scan enemies and just a ton of damage. Like, we're done. We want to give you something to master, because the power of fantasy that is earned is far more satisfying than the one that is just handed to you.
From the very beginning, the design ideas and techniques I've been talking about are all mostly geared towards making the player play fast and technical, which I think is really cool. But if that's not what someone wants their game to be, then obviously these aren't the choices that should be made. Doom Eternal is a great game, but it's not for everyone, just as technical platform fighters are great and also not for everyone. But Doom understands what its players want and how to give that to them in a way that's fair and satisfying, and that's something that every game should strive for. Hey, thank you so much for watching this whole video. If you liked it, consider hitting the algorithm help me button to appease the Lovecraftian robo-god we've accidentally created. And consider subscribing if you want to see more videos in the future. Also, just want to say thank you so much to all my patrons and Twitch subs, and if you want to join the ranks of the people's names you see on screen right now, there's links in the description. Okay, flippity floppity.